last December or so, when everybody suddenly got access and started looking at ChatGPT, and then very soon after, the other models and things were made public, it caused quite a lot of stir in my world, the world of Wiki, in terms of thinking about, okay, what does this technology mean for us? What does it mean for the knowledge landscape? Because it's pretty amazing to see, the generation of very plausible, very good, well-written text that may or may not be true, which is actually the big concern that obviously everybody has. So, the first thing that people think is, oh gosh, is this the end of Wikipedia? Because suddenly this AI can just answer any question. And I would say, who knows what the future holds as we get, higher and higher quality models. But at least for now, we're not worried about that. The thing about ChatGPT and the other models is they hallucinate far too much. I love to give some examples. My favorite example is I asked ChatGPT, who is Kate Garvey, my wife? She's not a famous person, but she's known in the media, and she worked for Tony Blair for 10 years and so forth, so there are things known about her. And when I ask who is Kate Garvey, I get a different answer every time. In reality, she's set up a Project Everyone to promote the Sustainable Development Goals, and she's in New York now. They've done a big pavilion, But ChatGPT said she set up a nonprofit, which she did, to promote women's advancement in the workplace, which when I showed her, and it said that she set up with Miriam Gonzalez, Nick Clegg's wife, all of which is kind of plausible. As she said, if at the right time we had been at the same dinner and happened to get talking, that could have happened. It's also completely false. Of course, the fun thing is then I also ask, who did she marry? Get a different answer every day. That's kind of fun. I think, usually though, again, it's plausible. It's political journalists in the UK or members of parliament, people who she would have known in her career that you might guess, I think my favorite though was when it said that she married Peter Mandelson. And I said, oh gee, isn't Peter Mandelson quite famously gay? And then it got very huffy with me. It's like, well, gay people can get married, and it's not appropriate to speculate on people's personal lives. I'm like, all right then. But that kind of example illustrates what isn't working and what is not likely to be working for quite some time, because the way the technology works, it's very, very hard. The problem of grounding is actually one of the harder problems, because it's this giant probabilistic model that predicts the next word, and it really doesn't know where it got the information, and it can't because of the way the math works. So I think advances will be made in that area, and I think that's really important. But for now, when we are thinking about large language models and Wikipedia in particular, there's a few different aspects, and I think you're going to ask me about a few different aspects, but the main thing we're looking at is the question of how can we use this technology to build useful tools for our community of volunteers. So the simplest kind of example, just to send you down the right track of how we're thinking about this, is, so here's a Wikipedia entry, here's, the 12 sources at the bottom. Could you feed in the Wikipedia entry and the 12 sources and say, what is in the entry that is not supported by the sources? Because that's a common type of problem, is somebody's written something in, it sounds plausible, but it's not actually in the sources, and it needs to be removed, or it needs to be at least investigated. And to be able to scan all of Wikipedia and weight it by, severity, and weight it by traffic. In other words, if it's a very high-profile article, it's actually obviously more critical that we get it fixed. Whereas if it's for sort of obscure about a 14th century poet, we do need to get it fixed, but it's not as urgent as something that might be people are looking at. And so we see these opportunities where a tool like that wouldn't even have to be close to perfect, as long as it didn't waste people's time. If it could just give you some suggestions. So when you go to the article and you click edit, there could be a little block at the top saying, oh, here's some of the things that the AI thinks you might want to look at. So that kind of stuff is exciting, because that gives us an opportunity to improve Wikipedia, to make our volunteers' time more effective, and not, they're not wasting their time
looking at things that are already fine. So that's kind of it. And there's a lot more that we can talk about.
Definitely, lots I want to talk about. I think I also wanted to reflect on the kind of the advent of Wikipedia versus the advent of, generative AI, large language models, to general consumers. I do a lot of work with young people. And I know there's a couple of young people here in the audience who remember when Wikipedia became a thing, right? You were studying and you had this resource, and teachers would say, I don't want just, Wikipedia is not a source. I don't want it just from Wikipedia. Go through those sources, take a look, and bring more in. I think with ChatGPT, it's been a similar thing of, I don't want ChatGPT, right? I don't want ChatGPT essays and resources. And I think there's a lot to kind of unpack actually on the parallels of the journey of Wikipedia and the journey of ChatGPT and how it's being used in education and across society. I think you mentioned there about hallucinations. There's elements of kind of user trust as well that you're reinforcing. You're using AI to maybe reinforce that on Wikipedia. Can we unpick that a little bit more? How are we, maybe holding folks more accountable? How are we ensuring there's better transparency across the platform using AI that then is able to build trust in, the results and what we're able to glean from Wikipedia?
Yeah, I mean, for Wikipedia, the concept of trust, I'm actually writing a book about trust because it's always been such a core part of the Wikipedia world, the Wikipedia experience, in no small part because Wikipedia is so trusting. Anybody can come and edit, and so keeping it very, very open, you have to think about, okay, well, how do you stop it from becoming completely chaotic? As it turns out, most people are good, and so it isn't as hard as you might think. There's always a bit of vandalism, there's always some problems, but in general, people are quite good and want to do the right thing. And then, therefore, when we think about why is Wikipedia become trusted, and some of the lessons there are a little bit counterintuitive. I mean, one of the things, Wikipedia, you'll see articles that say the neutrality of this article has been disputed, or the following section doesn't cite any sources. So we tell you bad things about Wikipedia, but that actually tends to build trust. I always say, I wish the New York Times would occasionally say, we had a big fight in the newsroom and we weren't sure about this, but we decided to run it, but be warned, because instead they just present everything as if it's equally valid, which of course it can't be. And so that kind of transparency into the process. And then, just things like, if you go to a Wikipedia entry and you find an entry that's wrong or biased or something like this, that reduces your trust. And so even just having the ability for our volunteers to find those things in a faster way and fix them is obviously can be quite powerful in the long run.
And I know you've definitely inspired other platforms. I won't name who, but there's a big social media platform that started to have those kind of markers as well on particular posts. Being able to do that balance, and maybe New York Times will follow suit. Now, across the Wikimedia community, you have a lot of folks, you have a lot of languages, you have a lot of countries, a lot of different spaces that you're operating in. This has been another big feature, I guess, big upcoming feature, big development, big evolution we've been able to see, that of translation, that of multi-languages, that of being able to break down those barriers. And again, being maybe a member of the Wikimedia community, you see projects all the time looking at translation, being able to bring things that are culturally relevant in different places. Are you using some of these AI-driven tools for translation, for localization, to be able to bring more access across the globe on the Wikipedia platform?
Yeah, so if you wind back, I don't know, maybe you might say 10 years, it's been an evolution, so there was no one point at which this changed. But there was a period in time when machine translation was so bad that it was actually just a waste of time. You could get the gist of it and so on, but really the community didn't find it helpful. And even today, there's no real sense that you should just massively machine translate articles in Wikipedia because the quality is still not good enough. But it's good enough to be useful. And so we have some tools where just to facilitate that process, where you can do a quick machine translation into your language and then edit it from there to make it better. And that's become quite useful because machine translation has gotten so much better. It's still a long way from something that you could just let run sort of on its own, and that actually could be problematic. And actually, one of the things I always explain to people is there's a natural assumption people have that, what you really mean about machine translation is translating from English to Zulu language, for example. But actually, a huge part of what goes on with machine translation is translating from the small languages into Wikipedia. And that can take all kinds of forms. Even if we think about the very developed languages, German Wikipedia is one of the largest language versions of Wikipedia. But if you look at local villages in Germany, surprise, surprise, the articles on those villages are much better in German Wikipedia than in English. And so the ability to machine translate those into English is actually very useful. So this cultural interchange is really fantastic. And things like making culture from around the world visible in other places around the world has always been a part of what my dream of Wikipedia is. But the more that people who are living and breathing in different languages can communicate and can share knowledge, that's massive. And so we're really excited about the possibilities around machine translation, even though I think it's a way of reducing work or the way of expanding what you're able to do, not a replacement for human judgment.
Definitely, and I think that's a theme that we've got, in responsible AI deployment. It is about co-botting, it is about collaborating, it's about using it as a tool rather than as a complete replacement. I wanted to unpick just a little bit more about the kind of cultural end then, I guess, on, what's the kind of cultural exchange, cultural accessibility you think is now going to be made possible by using the AI in a more targeted way? Are there any examples that you have of, cultural understanding or exchange maybe that's come out as a result of the Wikimedia community?
Oh yeah, definitely. We have a lot of different projects in a lot of places around the world, which are really wonderful to see, where you think of cultures that might be in conflict, but the Wikipedians just care about the facts and care about getting it right. And there are a lot of people who are, for example, working in Arabic and Hebrew Wikipedia, people who are working in Ukrainian and Russian Wikipedia, who are trying really hard to resolve conflicts and to get at a neutral understanding of the facts and the history and things like that, which is really crucial. It's the first step in a path to a more peaceful world, is to actually be able to understand it. But it's also, move away from conflict regions. It's also just like understanding people. This is one of the arguments I've made unsuccessfully. We are currently blocked in China. But one of the things I say about that to try to explain, China feels deeply misunderstood in the world. And so what I say is not only when you block all of Wikipedia in China, you're not just stopping Chinese people from reading Wikipedia that's written by people all over the world, you're also stopping Chinese people from telling the story. And so if you imagine some wonderful local festival in a small town in China that's been going on for hundreds of years, that the world would be fascinated to learn about, and China would love us to know more about Chinese culture. Well, we really want to see the Chinese people writing that kind of thing, just like the German people write about local villages in Germany, right? We want to learn and we want to share that knowledge with everyone in the world, in every language of the world. And so these kind of barriers that governments put into place for cultural sharing, knowledge sharing, can be really damaging to all of us.
Which is very frustrating, and I think it's kind of it speaks to the testament, the remit, and the leverage that you have and influence that you have across the Wikipedia platform, that you're able to kind of do that cross borders and cross-culturally. Still staying with this idea of culture, right? With the session we're talking about publishing, we're talking about culture. I want to kind of bridge almost into the two. I remember, or I've seen actually often being on Wikipedia, as you do, what it takes for something to be deemed culturally significant enough, right, to be represented on a platform like Wikipedia. I wanted to understand, AI has had its detractors, has its cons, I guess, in a lack of diversity that we get to see in lots of different outputs because of what many of these larger data sets have been trained on. Is there an opportunity? Do you feel like there's a challenge that we have in ensuring that definition of significant, right, is something that we can evolve, something that we can broaden, something that we can have that's truly innovative in a way that isn't necessarily always represented in the publishing world? And I'll add to this question, yes. You've had over the years also this debate about, what counts as a eligible kind of primary source that we can quote on Wikipedia versus what we can't.
Yes.
And, is there any more that you feel that you've you've maybe had some influence on what is represented in publishing that we can then, back up on
this
Wikipedia
is
pages.
a huge question, and how the rise of AI and large language models is going to impact this is really hard to predict, because on the one hand, so a criticism one might make of Wikipedia, because we do require reliable sources, is that, of course, whatever biases are in the reliable sources can end up in Wikipedia. And we're aware of this, and people do try to think about it and deal with it. You can't write the history of the civil rights movement by only looking at Southern American newspapers written in the 1940s, because they were very much on one side of that issue, and the history wasn't being written and so on. So you've got to really be thoughtful about how do you integrate our more modern understanding and the work of historians to uncover great stories and things like that. And AI has that same issue, but possibly even worse, because it doesn't have sort of the human will to correct, biases in the record and find the balance and things like that. And so with AI, of course, we're all aware, because people talk about it all the time, if you simply train an AI on a biased data set, the AI is going to end up biased, of course. Like, it has no agency. It can't really do anything about that. At the same time, there's very much the possibility. I've done a few little experiments, just feeding in a news article or feeding in a Wikipedia article and asking ChatGPT to point out any biased statements. And it's imperfect, but it's interesting, and it's a valuable exercise. So you can imagine that kind of tool, again, a tool for our volunteers to correct bias in articles. But then there's the much deeper, harder problem, and we talk about this, and we don't have any really great solutions. But if you want to write about the history of the UK 1,000 years ago, there's loads and loads of sources. If you want to write about some other places in the world, there may not be sources, right? And so we had this big oral history project to sort of think about, how do you grapple with oral history in our context without just opening yourself up to just like, somebody shows up and writes, my grandma told me this, right? Okay, well, that's probably not good enough. On the other hand, you have to respect that kind of handed down knowledge and think about how would you deal with that? What are the right standards to grapple with that sort of thing? So we're always thinking about that kind of thing and thinking about representation in that way. There's a Wikipedian who's really, really focused on African American history in the U.S., who really struggles with a lot of these issues. I remember this great discussion we had about the high school I went to, which is a private school in Alabama, has an entry in Wikipedia. It's quite nice, and it tells the history of the school and all that, and it's not even an important school, really. And then a local, traditionally black high school doesn't have an article in Wikipedia, and he was trying to write one, and it's actually really hard, because it was completely ignored by the newspapers back in the day and so on. And the history barely exists, and there was a documentary. We were desperately trying to get our hands on the documentary and things like that. But it's really, those challenges are not the fault of Wikipedia, and hopefully we can be, to a degree, a counterbalance. But really, it's going to be, some of these biases, damage was done in history, and now we sit with it.
It's definitely something that I think we're grappling with across the landscape. So my last couple of questions before we wrap up. I wanted to maybe dream a little bit with you, right? We're supposed to be talking about the future. I wanted to first off know, Wikipedia is the same. Wikipedia is a couple of decades old, right? We can say it's not quite the same age as me. It's a little bit younger than me. If we think, into the future, that same length of time again, a couple of decades, 3 decades, 4 decades, maybe 5 decades, what's your vision for Wikipedia? What are you hoping happens next or as a result of Wikipedia? And what do you want to be the kind of seismic change? We've already had quite a few as a result of Wikipedia, but what do you want to be the kind of the final, maybe, seismic change of it?
So there's a few things. So if we just think about what seems likely to happen, and I don't know, if 50 years, that's a long time, so I don't know, but 10 years, let's say. I think what you see on Wikipedia, if you're a typical person speaking English and maybe one other language or like that, you won't see a lot of change. Like Wikipedia is going to remain an encyclopedia. It's going to be largely text. Hopefully the quality continues to improve and more obscure topics are covered. But effectively, it's basically the same. The real change that you won't see will be the rise of Wikipedia in the languages of the developing world, which are already growing quite quickly, and the next billion people will come online, and we suddenly have these great tools for being able to share knowledge across cultures and things like that. And I'm very excited and very optimistic about that sort of thing. So if you can imagine, let's say you're trying to learn physics, and you're trying to learn quantum mechanics, and let's say you're a native English speaker, and all of the sources and everything you really need to know is written in Japanese. Well, that's a huge challenge because the concepts are hard enough to grasp in your mother tongue, much less. And so now imagine trying to grasp all kinds of concepts and you are a native speaker of Swahili or Zulu or something like that. So can we bring knowledge to everyone so that they can, of course, if you're going to be a professional in that field, you're probably going to have to grapple with it in its original text. But to really just get started understanding, you kind of need explanations in your own language. So that's really important to me. And that growth in all those languages of the world, you probably won't notice it unless you speak that language, right? And then, in terms of the sea change or the thing I hope, right now it's easy to get a little bit distraught because the lack of trust in journalism and the lack of trust in politicians and the, like whenever the phrase post-truth world came out, it made my freaking head explode because it's like, no, actually facts really matter. And before you can even come to a coherent understanding of what public policy should be, you better actually know what the hell's going on in the first place. Like, get your facts straight. And so it's annoying to me that our politicians in most places around the world are about as fact-free as you can be these days. And it's like, there's Wikipedia. Like, you can go look this stuff up. So when Donald Trump sort of intimates that Mexico's sending murderers and rapists, it's like, well, there's a factual claim. You can look it up. It's false. Okay, so it's like, so anyway, my hope is that people will actually read Wikipedia before they vote.
I mean, that would be a hope. It is free as well. You don't need ID to be able to access Wikipedia, unless, of course, you're in China. So my final question is one that's a little bit more future focused, a little bit more future leaning. You spoke there about Wikipedia still predominantly being about the text, but of course Wikimedia, you have audio, you have images, there's quite a rich kind of resource that you have. And a lot of the excitement I think that folks have about AI at the moment is not just models that are able to be applied in lots of different scenarios and used in lots of different ways in one piece of technology rather than across lots of different bits of software, but it's also the kind of multimodal elements that we have. This is now text, this is images, this is audio that we heard in our previous session, it's video. I wanted to maybe take a more futuristic look. Is there anything else you wish we were able to capture digitally? As you think about it, we've been talking about fashion, for example, in our previous session. I've seen folks trying to codify embroidery, needles, all kinds of crafts that maybe are dying out. Is there anything that you wish we were able to be capturing maybe as another data type or data form that might be part of the Wikimedia empire?
Yeah, I mean, for us, visual content, pictures are always an important part of things and so forth. And the rise of a lot of the digital stuff. So there's downsides and upsides, or there's risks. So obviously these days it's possible using Mid-Journey and things like that to generate very persuasive looking images that are completely made up. And that could be a problem, although it's not likely to be a problem for us because we always require a source and so on, and we care about the provenance and things. So if you just upload a photo, but it wouldn't be that hard to upload a photo of something very plausible and uncontroversial that's completely made up, and that would not be okay, but could happen in Wikipedia. Here's Barack Obama addressing a conference, and maybe it's not controversial. It's not trying to pretend he was addressing Nazis or something like that, but just, and I wouldn't be happy to have an image that was made up in Wikipedia, but it's got to really be careful about sourcing. But on the other side, there's all kinds of interesting things. So we really care a lot about accessibility, making sure that every image in Wikipedia should have the appropriate alt tag with a description for screen readers for the blind and that sort of thing. And we do a pretty good job of that, but there's still a lot of images in Wikipedia that can be improved. That suddenly becomes super easy, right? To feed the image to AI and say, what is this? And get a decent description out, that's great. And so that kind of facilitation of improving things that, again, you might not necessarily notice if you're not blind and you're not using a screen reader, but it's hugely important. But again, you can think immediately about, oh, okay, but suddenly if you can describe an image fully, then you can search an image. You can. I'm editing an article, and it can say, oh, by the way, you're talking about this incident. Did you know there's a photo? Which in the past, you could barely do it with keyword searches and things like that. Now you can get pretty specific. I mean, that doesn't exist today, but it's clearly going to happen very, very quickly. And so then suddenly, this great body of images we have becomes, these huge databases of out-of-copyright historic images of buildings, and we do use those in Wikipedia, but not as well as we could, and suddenly that becomes a lot easier. So it's an exciting time.
I would have said taste.
Taste?
Yeah.
Oh, taste.
Yeah. I'd love for us to be able to search and archive tastes.
Like Smellopedia.
Yeah, that's it. You heard it here first, folks. Smellopedia. If you'd like to join me in thanking Jimmy Wales, we're going to close up this session and head into the next.